RFK Jr. Let me tell you, Eric, we got a lot of RFK Jr. fans and supporters on this here channel right here, and I'm guessing they're not happy about the fact that RFK Jr. is not going to debate. And whether you like RFK Jr., support him or don't, I do think that he should be able to debate. I'm thinking in my lifetime when you had the election in the 90s where you had Ross Perot run in both 92 and 96. Now I was pretty young. I was 10 and 14 years old. But that was the last time I remember, and the numbers prove this. A third party candidate that was actually a factor, right? That really had a strong percentage. Didn't he get 19% one year? Is that right?
In
19%?
92, yeah, first
And I think
year.
he got, did he get 14 or 16% the following election?
It
Something
was
like that.
less, but yeah, it was in the
Something.
teens, I think.
Okay.
Mhm.
So whatever it was, and I'll look it up. People can look it up and correct me. I have no problem with people correcting me because I'm often either wrong or I'm like Roger Clemens. I misremember things. But
Mhm.
my point is, so let's just say after 96. So go from 96 until this year, which is 2024. So that's 28 years. And you tell me if I'm wrong. I can't remember another election cycle where I felt like the third party candidate actually deserved to be on the debate stage. And I do think, based on some polling, some popularity, I do think RFK Jr. deserves to be on the debate stage. What do you think?
So, I have a lot of thoughts on this. First of all, I like more candidates, not less, in
Hmm.
general, and I don't like our two-party system in the way that it's constructed now. I have no problem with having 2 parties, and I have no problem with those parties being the Republican and Democrat. I just think the problem is we don't have a great system of voting. That's why I prefer ranked choice voting. You would have 4 candidates theoretically. They could be Republicans, they could be Democrats, they could be independents. I think that would make our democracy more healthy. So I like more candidates. I don't like how the 2 parties have worked together to box out third party and independent candidates. And that's one of the reasons we don't have them. And you mentioned this debate criteria. It was the criteria was 15% polling in 4 polls. I think he ended up getting that number in 3. To me, that polling criteria is too high. It should have been like 5% or 10%. Again, because we should err toward more voices. So I think RFK Jr. has met my criteria for being a viable enough third party or independent candidate to be in the debates. He's met my criteria. The other one is 200 being on the ballot in states that equal 270 electoral votes, which is what you need to win. And that's a ridiculous criteria at this point in June because most states haven't even certified their ballot yet. I think he's on the ballot officially right now in 7 states, but in 20 plus, he's collected signatures that just haven't been reviewed yet because these
Hmm.
states don't have any incentive to review them now. We're 4 or 5 months away from the election and months away from them finalizing their ballot. But most likely, if Kennedy stays in the race, which I think he will, he's raised enough money and has enough support. He will be on the ballot in probably 30 plus states, and so he will meet that criteria. So I don't like the criteria. I wish he were in the debates. I think we should err on the side of more candidates, not less.
Yeah. And I was wrong, by the way, on Ross Perot he did get 19% in 92. He only got 8.4% in 96. But that's still a good number, but I thought it
And
was
by the
higher than
way,
that.
in 92, he was leading polling, speaking of polling, in the summer, early summer of 1992. And then he dropped out of the race, even though he was polling really well, and then got back in the race later in the fall. And I don't remember because it's a long time ago and I was young. I don't remember how long he was out. But if he had stayed in the race, I'm not saying he would have won, but maybe he gets 25 or 30%. I mean, it's possible.
And we've talked earlier and on other podcasts just about just democracy. And I think sometimes growing up, you take your social studies class and you're like, hey, we have this great democracy where anybody can win the presidency. And then you kind of see what's happened. And I can label this on all the different candidates. You realize it's not really a democracy, right? I mean, you could start with January 6th and everything that happened trying to subvert the election. You can talk about, on the other side, trying to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop. trying to suppress some of the COVID discussion, YouTube and Facebook and things of that nature. Then you can talk about the potential lawfare if you're on the right and everybody's talking about banana republic. But my point is like there's banana republic type things going on, it seems like, all over the place recently. And then even RFK Jr. You just if you watch his podcast and listen to his interviews, you do realize how hard it is for a third party to enter the fight. And that's by design. Let's be real. I mean, RFK Jr. started out, he wanted to run. He did run as a Democrat. He realized he has no chance there. I still think next time around, if he wants to run again in 2028 in an actual open Democratic primary, I think he would do really, really well. And that's 4 years from now. But I don't know. I think you do realize how the two-party system, first of all, I think it's killing this country. It's making us hate each other. But it also it's there for a reason, and it's reinforced with money and bureaucracy so that it always succeeds. It's really hard for somebody like RFK Jr. to really show out because I actually think he could. We had this debate earlier. I said his number would go way up if he got the chance to debate. And look what we're seeing. They're not really giving him a fair shake, in my opinion.
No, they're not. I agree. And look, I am no huge fan of RFK Jr. I do think he says some very interesting things and has some interesting opinions that I think it would be worthy to have some of those opinions. The way he talks about big pharma and our food supply, and these are things you don't hear Trump and Biden talk about a lot, and it would, if at all. So it'd be really nice to have some of those conversations because I think those are big issues that are kind of under the radar that are not talked about a lot, but really affect people more than some other issues that are talked about more. So I would like to see him in the debate. There's so in terms of our system overall, there's two reasons generally why a third party or independent candidate can't get traction. You talked about one of them, which is the other two parties work to box them out. And that's obvious with ballot requirements. That's obvious with keeping them out of debates. But there's another reason that is kind of more fundamental. And that it's the main reason they never win. And that is because of our system that was designed by our founding fathers. I don't think they intended it this way because they didn't envision the modern political system with two parties. But the way they set it up, we have what's called a first past the post system. And if you're not a political scientist, what that means is all you have to do is get more votes than the other guy, and you win in single member districts for the House and Senate and one president, as opposed to a parliamentary system, which is what most of Europe has, where you vote for the party more than the candidate. And if you get 15% of the vote, you get 15% of the seats. So the Green Party can be a viable party in Europe and get their 10 to 15%. Here, 10 to 50% gets you nothing, nothing. So there's no incentive for it. And people don't want to vote for people that can't win, which is why I've always maintained, as interesting as RFK Jr. is, his support will fade. And it's why I said last week or 2 weeks ago that he was a placeholder for a lot of people who don't like Biden or Trump. I really believe that. And part of it is because people don't like to vote for candidates that can't win. The way to make it different is to change the system of how we vote, particularly with ranked choice voting. Because if you had ranked choice voting and you loved RFK Jr., but you were scared to death of Biden or you were scared to death of Trump, if you had a ranked choice voting system, you could vote for RFK Jr. And then you'd put maybe Biden second. And if you didn't like Trump, you'd put him last. And so you would know that your vote wouldn't be quote unquote wasted because you would know that your vote would never go to help elect Donald Trump or help elect Joe Biden. But in our current system, if you vote for RFK Jr. in one of those 6 or 7 swing states or any of the other independent candidates, you are very likely tilting the race toward either Biden or Trump. And that's just the reality of our political system.
Yeah. And no, I agree with that. I will say this, and I want you to clarify also because we have this new RFK Jr. contingent following this channel. I will say because you and I were in agreement on that, but I did hear from a lot of folks who also said no, it's not just because we don't like Trump, we don't like Biden. There is a strong percentage, and I'm not going to pretend like I know what that percentage is. But there is a strong percentage of people that really do support RFK Jr. for RFK Jr. and for his message, and not just the vaccine stuff, but also he does really speak to younger people being frozen out of the housing market and how all of these policies and inflation are really killing Gen Z. So again, I don't know what the percentage is. I do think a lot of people, like for me, I don't like Trump or Biden. And that is why I am more matriculating to keeping an open mind on RFK Jr. Now, I do like his message. And I don't know everything he's said over the last 40 years. I certainly don't agree with everything that Joe Biden and Donald Trump have said over 40 years. So I'm going to throw it back to you. Why are you not a big fan of RFK Jr.? And what crazy things do you think he's said? Because by the way, I'm sure he has, but then I also think about it and I'm thinking, well, Donald Trump said inject yourself with bleach, and Joe Biden said that his uncle was eaten by cannibals, right? So it's like if you're 70 plus years old, which RFK, Biden, and Trump are all over 70, they've all said crazy things in their life, right? I'm just wondering, and I don't
That's
know.
true.
I guess I'm not disqualifying any of them at this point for some of the craziness because I think they've all said nutty things and they've also changed. Like if you're 70 to 80 years old and you haven't changed policy as the world has changed, like, I mean, people talk about Joe Biden, racial jungle, and he said that 50 years ago. Well, I would hope that people change when they're 80,
Yes.
right? I would hope
Yeah.
that I change my opinion on some things, and I'm only 42. So there you go.
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe some people didn't didn't like some of the things I said about RFK Jr. Partially that was my fault because I don't think we didn't talk about him in kind of this well-rounded way we are now. So I want to be
Mhm,
clear when I've talked about most of my negativity is on his as on his prospects of winning. Like I'm
mhm.
looking at it as an analyst, right? So I want
Yeah.
to be clear as someone who looks at polling and analyzes election, putting aside whether you like him or don't like him or agree or disagree with him, just strictly in terms of analyzation, I do not think he will get more than 5% in the states that matter. I
Mhm.
just think at the end of the day, does he have true believers? Absolutely. Does he have people that love him and they're with him not because they don't like Biden or Trump, but because they love him? Absolutely. So I want to be clear that that's the lens I'm talking mainly about RFK Jr. through. But as personally, I like RFK Jr. I think he's interesting. I think he says some things that I agree with. I think again, I mentioned this earlier, he talks about issues that aren't talked about as much. I like that. So I would like to see him in the debates. I also want to be clear that I admit this. I have not spent nearly as much time thinking about, reading about, watching RFK Jr. as I have Biden and Trump. And that's for one main reason, which is again, I don't think he has any chance to win and be a real serious factor in this election as anything other than a spoiler. And so therefore I haven't really spent a lot of time. Also, I'm 45 and so I still consume mostly the mainstream corporate media. I'm not on YouTube all day or looking at podcasts. So I know, right? So I don't see, even though you and I are on YouTube, other than our show, of course, other than Everybody
Sure.
Settle Down
Yeah.
and a few others. There are a few other YouTube shows I do watch. But I will say, after we did our recent show, I went back and watched some RFK Jr. clips and short interviews. I didn't listen to any of I didn't do the 3 hour Joe Rogan, but I watched some clips and some. What I will say about RFK Jr. is he's interesting. I like some of the things he talks about. Some of his ideas, I would say, are a little bit out there. And I think he is benefiting by look, lack of exposure is a double edged sword.
Mhm.
It hurts you to a degree. Like, obviously, he'd be better off if he were in the debate, right? No matter how he performed, just from the exposure. But getting more exposure and being a serious candidate, there's another point to that, and that is the media and the other candidates then take you seriously. They don't
Mhm.
take RFK Jr. seriously now. They're not running exposés for the most part on all of the things he has said about vaccines, for instance, over the years. They're not really doing that in the mainstream media. I watch a lot of it. I haven't seen any of that recently. I saw a little bit, but months ago, but not recently. Biden and Trump, they hit him here or there, but they don't spend time. They're not running attack ads against RFK Jr. If he ever became serious, that would change, right? And
Mhm.
not to mention, and look, his voice would be an issue. It doesn't bother me. I don't care. Again, I don't care about physical frailty. I don't care about your voice. What I care about is your mind sharp? Are you a decent person? And will you make good decisions? So I don't care about it. But I think it would be an issue for some people who were like, I don't know about this guy on the world
Mhm.
stage, like being our representative with that voice issue that he has, which is obviously no fault of his own. So I think
Yeah.
that's part of the but it's part of the package. If we're going to talk about Biden's age, or we're going to talk about Trump saying crazy things, it's fair to point that out as a potential issue if he ever became a real serious contender. Look, in terms of the vaccine stuff, I that's a whole show.
Yeah.
I would just say I think some of the vaccine criticism of him, again, to the extent that I've looked into it, which is minimal to moderate. I have not done deep dives, but I have looked into it. To the extent I've looked into it, it's a little bit overblown. But also, there is a lot of fact checking of some of the things he said about vaccines. And some of the things he said about COVID vaccines were not true. Look, my son has autism, so this is kind of personal to me. He has brought up the autism thing with vaccines. There have been numerous studies by medical professionals that have debunked that over the years. I know he takes issues with those. I'm not a doctor. All I will say is numerous studies by medical profession have debunked any link between vaccines and autism over the years. And so I think what happens is, because RFK Jr. is very smart, and he is, and because he is very knowledgeable on certain issues like vaccines, and he has an air of authority to him when he talks. But that doesn't mean that everything he says is right. Just because you're smart and you're well informed and you talk with authority doesn't mean everything you say is correct. And you can, again, this is not the forum to have that debate, but you can go online and look at those various fact checks. There have been numerous ones done over the years. In terms of some of his other policies, they're interesting, but again, they haven't gotten the kind of scrutiny that Biden and Trump's policies get, because people don't take him seriously as a candidate that can win. I'll give you a good example. He talks about this a lot, the Uncle Sam home thing, right? We know it's a
Mhm.
problem. People can't afford homes. He says, well, if you have a rich uncle, they can co-sign. Uncle Sam should co-sign for you. I haven't done a deep dive on that. Here would be my question. If people who have questionable credit to get a mortgage loan have the government back that loan, and they get a loan that they would not have gotten on their own, isn't that exactly how we ended up in the mess in 2008, where we had a housing crisis that nearly crashed our economy because so many people who shouldn't have gotten mortgage loans got them? And it sounds like that's his plan, except now he wants to have the government back those instead of the private sector. I mean, that in 2008, that housing crisis brought down Lehman Brothers. It almost collapsed our banking industry. And now we're going to switch and have the government take that burden. I mean, again, I'm no expert. Is that really the best way to fix what is a legitimate housing crisis in America? These are things that would be discussed in depth if he ever was taken as a serious candidate, which he really isn't right now.
Okay, I'll be quick. Here's what I'll say about the 3% Uncle Sam loan. I like it on the surface. I agree with you, and I'm in the rental property business. You can't just give anybody a 3% loan if they don't qualify. When I heard that, I thought of more as that Bush tax credit that was given out in 2008 during the housing collapse. I know my sister and her husband bought it. Was a first-time home purchase credit. I believe it was $8,000 to try to incentivize people to buy a home when the housing market was just crazy back then. So that's what I thought of, but I agree that this needs to be looked into more, but I like the idea of it. And then the other thing, without getting into the whole vaccine debate, which again could be 10 shows, I agree more with his big picture stance on for profit medicine. And you could talk about this
Yes.
with vaccines and COVID. You could also talk about it with food, where companies are clearly incentivized to keep people sick, to keep people fat, whatever it is. And I'll tell you, just look, my thing on the COVID vaccine, I think it basically half worked. And I'm not even trying to get into it and do a whole debate on that. But I will say this. I had one of those moments when I was watching that show Dope Sick, and all my references come from pop culture shows. But that was about the OxyContin crisis. And when they basically said, look, if the oxy isn't working, you need to double the amount. And they called it breakthrough pain. right? That's how it happened during the
Yeah.
OxyContin crisis. And then COVID hits, and now you have breakthrough infections, right? You broke through the vaccine. And when I heard the term breakthrough, and by the way, I think the vaccine half worked. We can get into that another day. But when I heard the term breakthrough, I said, like, from a marketing standpoint, they're doing the same thing they did with OxyContin, right? Oh, it's a breakthrough pain. You have to double the dosage. It's a breakthrough infection. You need a booster. And we all know that the COVID vaccine, it didn't do exactly what they said, of course. The protection waned. You had variants, you had the initial COVID, then you had Delta, then you had Omicron. If you're really trying to have that debate, it has to be like an hour discussion. But my
Yeah.
big picture point is when I heard the breakthrough infection and I'm watching Dope Sick and I hear breakthrough pain as the marketing scheme to sell more Oxycontin, you do start to think and learn how big pharma sells this to people. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And again, I want to be clear. I like RFK Jr. I like some of his ideas. And like you said, I love some of his big picture with whether you agree or not with the details of what he says. I like talking about how do we
Mhm.
get people into a home with these interest rates where they are right now? What can we do to rein in big pharma more than just the prices of drugs? As I mentioned, Biden has done some stuff on that. But how can we change the way that's done in America, the for profit medicine system? He talks about farming, which our farming practices, if you've watched some of these documentaries like on Netflix, there's a ticking time bomb with some of this stuff like mad cow disease and the way that we farm these concentrated feeding operations, cramming these chickens into tiny cages and they're shitting all over each other and they've got pump full of antibiotics. It's a mess. And he talks about stuff like that, and I like that, and I want to see him in the debates. And I'm not anti RFK Jr. I think he's interesting and smart and occasionally funny. What I'm saying is some of his ideas have not been vetted to the degree that Biden's and Trump's have, and if they were, like, for instance, he talks a lot about spending a lot of money to do a lot of things, but all candidates do. But I heard him say in this interview with CNBC, he doesn't want to raise taxes on anybody. No tax increases. And he also wants to cut the deficit. He talks a lot about the deficit. So you're going to have all these funding programs that you want to do, some of which are very worthy, I think. You're not going to raise any revenue through taxes, and you want to cut the deficit. Now, he does say while cutting military spending by a dramatic amount. I mean, he's talking about like a massive cut in military spending by like an order of 50% or more. Is that really wise right now for America with China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and the threats we face? We're going to scale our military back to, what it was like 60 years ago. So that what I'm saying is interesting. Yes. Would I like to see more of him? Yes. Do I think he has solved every problem in America and he's being, he's like this golden candidate who has these miraculous ideas that would save America if not for the evil corporate media and Joe Biden and Donald Trump? No. I think if he ever became a serious candidate, there would be a extreme and extensive blowback that would hit him that hasn't come his way yet.
But here's how you know the man is keeping him down. The second we start talking about RFK Jr., Eric, and we had to edit this, your internet went out. The second we were trying to say positive things about RFK Jr., miraculously, your internet messed up and we had to stop talking and re-edit it. So that shows you right there.
Yeah, there's it's a vast right and left wing conspiracy to keep RFK Jr. out of the presidency.